You can open, Mr. Leader.
Great. Thank you very much, Christine. Good evening, everybody. Welcome out to Cabinet, 13th of April 2021. Before we move into the main business of tonight's agenda, I think we ought to take a minute's silence just to honour the passing of His Royal Highness, the Duke of Edinburgh. So let's just take a minute, starting now, and I'll let you know when the minute's done. Thank you. Thank you, everybody. Thank you for that, and good to see you all this evening. First item on the agenda tonight then is apologies for absence. Have we had any apologies for absence? No, I think everyone's here, so we're good there. Item number 2 then, declarations of interest. Anybody got any declarations to make at this point? Councillor Yates.
Yes, item 5, the Garrick Theatre. I do some work with the Garrick, and incidentally, their first show back, Black Country Night Out, is a show that I'm involved in. So I will drop off the meeting then.
Right, thank you very much. Thank you, Councillor Yates. Any others? As always, if any come up during the meeting as we progress, please feel free to stop whoever's speaking and declare that interest at the earliest opportunity. So let's do a quick roll call. Councillor Eady, just make sure your video and audio is working. Ian.
Good evening, Doug.
Excellent evening. Councillor Lax. Excellent. Your audio is slightly dodgy, Angela. I think you might just need to lean into the those expensive AirPods that you've got. Not expensed, I'm sure. Councillor Smith.
Yes, I'm here. Thanks, Doug.
Good evening. Councillor Cox.
Present, Doug.
Councillor Strachan.
I'm here, Leader. Good evening.
Good evening. Councillor Little.
Good evening, Leader.
Good evening. Yeah, good evening. I hope that cold sorts itself out. Councillor Yates.
I'm still here, yes.
Still there. Fantastic. Super. And we're joined this evening by a team of officers, including Gareth Davis, Ben Percival, Christy Timms, our Chief Executive, Diane Tilley, William Stevenson. Good evening, William. I think your first meeting with us this evening. Ably supported by Mark Hooper and Christine Lewis. So good evening, everybody. We'll move straight into the agenda items then. Councillor Lax, I think we're over to you for agenda item number 3, which is the revised housing assistance policy. Thank you.
Thank you, Leader. As you were commenting on my sound, is it all right now? Good. Thank you. The housing assistance review was carried out because it was very much due to be reviewed earlier this year, but it was also driven to a large extent by the fact that these monies which we receive from central government are ring-fenced. We have a surplus, and we wanted to very much look at what more we could do to help those people who needed adaptations in their home, and to help more people qualify for them. And I would stress at this stage, for anybody watching who's not familiar with this, it's physical adaptations, because there are references to palliative care in the paper, but it is only for physical adaptations. So what we've done was this started off with overview and scrutiny very early in the year, where we presented all the possible options. for them to consider, get their guidance, their suggestions, their comments, and then the officers went away and looked at what we could implement and would work. Bearing in mind, we've still got to be careful, we're spending taxpayers' money. So the officers and myself went back to overview and scrutiny, I think in March, setting out what we felt we could get implemented as quickly as possible, which is what is before you today. And the reason I'm seeking delegated authority to myself and Gareth Davis as head of service is that we want to continue working and looking at further options to enhance what we can offer people, if at all possible. So rather than, shall we say, having longer lead-in times, that's what we want to do. And I hope you'll support us in that, particularly as some of the things that we would like to introduce will have to go through the Silas partnership, of which we are one of 6 throughout Staffordshire for dealing with DFGs, and with the county council. So that's the reason for that request. In terms of what we're looking to do, one of the issues was that the discretionary top-up grant for adaptions had been sitting at 30,000 for some considerable time. And we were very concerned that this was perhaps a barrier to people getting what they needed done or qualifying. So the proposal is to increase this by 15,000, bringing the total up to 45,000. On top of this, there's a separate relocation grant. So on top of that, someone could qualify for £5,000 to help them move to a more suitable property when they need it. And then very mindful of how some of the calculations we have to apply, of which we have no choice, could work against some people who perhaps, if the principal person in the household for earning money is the one taken ill and needing the support, the way you qualify for support could be severely impacted. Hence, we've introduced a discretionary contribution grant of up to £30,000, which we hope will facilitate more people getting help if they qualify. And then we've made some minor amendments to the housing repair assistance and energy efficient grants, and the housing repair grant. So I hope everybody feels able to support the recommendations. Certainly ONS were very supportive. That's what I've got to say. Thank you very much.
Great, thank you, Councillor Lax. I'll open up the floor for questions then. Indicate you can use the blue hands just so I can keep some sort of order. Great. Ian, over to you.
Thank you, Angela, for taking us through the paper. And I certainly warmly welcome the intention of what you are seeking to do with this revised policy. I think obviously with the cost of all services going up, it's very good that the council can find ways to obviously help people if cost is going to be a barrier to getting adaptions done. Whilst obviously not directly related to the award of money, I wonder if you could give any commentary in the sense of saying, will this help speed up people getting adaptions done to their homes? Because I'm conscious, obviously, in the past that it's taken longer than anybody would like. And I'm wondering, therefore, was that an issue that you've identified in terms of under the new policy, it was about the right level of funding, or was there other issues at play? And if it's other issues, what is going to happen in terms of helping them so that people can get the help when they need it as quickly as possible?
You have watched or listened to the overview and scrutiny meetings. There's been concerns expressed about how the current system works at the partnership level with regard to the county council and the current providers, Millbrook. We now have a system of monitoring the KPIs that we need for them to move as quickly as possible, but they've just put in a new computer system. We had a lockdown 3, etc., etc. And that we will closely monitor, and that has all been looked at and examined very thoroughly by the Overview and Scrutiny Committee. What this does, though, in respect of the, let me just find it, the discretionary contribution grant of up to 30,000 at 3.5.2, this is the one where we're hoping could make a big difference. When I was talking about, say, the person who's brings in the most money to a household is the person with the illness, is that it will be approved. We hope to get out awards quickly for up to 5,000, and then over that on a case by case basis by the housing and wellbeing manager or the head of service. Obviously, it will be subject to assessment, etc. But the idea about this is that we are taking control ourselves to try and get the money out as quickly as possible, because we're allowed to do it this way, because we're using our money with this additional grant.
Thank you, Andrew. That's great to hear.
Great, thank you, Ian. Any more? Councillor Strachan.
Thank you, Leader. It's only a very quick one from me. We've historically had a difficulty with getting this money out of the door, and I see that you refer to that in your introduction at 3.4. My note says. If it's actually the underspend is at 3.3. Could I just really place on record my thanks to you and your team for really trying hard to find a way to make sure this money gets to where it needs to be as quickly as possible, because elements of that underspend, I think, have been a lack of visibility. I agree with you that elements have perhaps been the barrier caused by that ceiling. But I think also elements have been a difficulty with delivery via partners. And I would hope that where we are doing everything that we can to get our or keep our end up, that will also help to spur our partners in delivering it as well. So I welcome this in its entirety and support you, Councillor Lax. So yeah, I should be voting with it.
Thank you.
Great, thanks, Rob. Councillor Smith.
Thanks, Doug. Yeah. Like my colleagues, I absolutely approve of what we're trying to do here. I think it's the exact right thing to do. The discretionary top up, like Councillor Strachan said, I'm hoping will help facilitate more usage of the grant. I just had a quick sort of technical question, if you like, under 3.3, where we've had our 400k underspend. Is the main reason for the underspend the fact that a lot of the projects needed more to put into them, or is it a delivery problem of the actual getting the contracts done? Which one is it at the tour? Is it a bit of both?
It's quite a complex answer. There's an element of certainly time delay accompanied by COVID, because you're talking about assessing people and contractors into vulnerable people, vulnerable in their homes. That's not making excuses, because there are delays in the system, which we as council have really addressed with our own consultant involved in the process, who's very skilled and understands the whole process. That's part of the reason of getting the KPIs going. Another complex issue is that people apply and then realise that they're not eligible, because obviously this has to be means tested. So people drop out for whatever reason. Or there's a misunderstanding of what the grant is for, it can do. The money, for want of a better word, and I'll stand corrected by Gareth, the head of service from central government. We do our best to facilitate spending it. It's not for want of trying, but obviously there's a lot of variables in the system, some of which we can control, others we can't, which will be reflected in the annual spend, if you like. So while we've got this money, we want to do our best to get it out where we can.
Understood. Makes sense, and I know we're going to strive to do that, and I think the discretionary top up will have to help out with that, plus the other bits. Just one final thing. One final thing on 3.3 with the underspend we've got. Is there any kind of clawback on that if we don't spend it under a certain time, or do we? Can we use that as we need to into the future? How does that sort of clawback or not operate?
But I understand it's not subject to clawback currently, because once it's spent, it's spent. Is that right, Gareth?
Yes.
Yeah. Thanks. Cheers, Gareth. And then the only question I've got, it's in the financial section, we talk about using Millbrook as a sort of as an agent for this to make this happen, so to speak. and it says they're charging a fee 16%. Have we done any sort of benchmarking on if that is that the right sort of number? Is that too much, too little? Are there other options on that?
That might be one for Gareth Davis, I'd suggest. I'd imagine Angela wasn't portfolio holder when that appointment was made. Gareth, you want to come in on that?
Thank you. Yes, it went through a full procurement exercise at the time, and that was obviously a competitive rate. It wasn't just based on the rate, obviously, the procurement exercise. It was based on quality, speed, etc. But yes, it is a competitive rate.
Brilliant. Okay, that's me done. Thanks for the info.
Right, thanks, Andy. Any more then? I can't see anybody indicating. I think, Angela, if I can just a couple of comments and then a question. I think this policy is excellent. I think what it does is, I think, as Ian said earlier on, is make sure that the money gets to where it needs to get to. So I think we deal quite efficiently with the lack of increase in the grant for the mandatory works, where it hasn't been increased since 2008. I think the report says we actually deal with that fairly efficiently in providing a discretionary top up there of £15,000. And I also think in terms of the discretionary contribution grant, the fact that 21 out of 88 grants were prevented, which this presumably would actually allow to continue, that's a serious uplift of 25%. So I think it's absolutely fantastic, and it seems fair, and it gets the money to where it needs to be and the people who need it. So that is fantastic. My question, and it's following on the theme of sort of fairness, is on the equality impact assessment that we undertook. And it says in the final sentence of that there are other remedies available to replace the grants, and they will mitigate for that. I'm just wondering what those other remedies available are, and I appreciate that might be a technical question for Gareth, but I just wanted to kind of get a bit more detail around that sort of the mitigation that's in place for the grant that's being dropped out.
Thank you. The mitigation is effectively to still deal with the defects that exist within people's properties. So people haven't got the money to remedy their own property and the safety issues that exist there. We will use our powers under the Housing Act 2004 to still do that work, so that people aren't left in unsafe conditions, but a charge will be placed against the property rather than a grant provided to the individual to pay for the works. So these, of course, are targeted principally at owner-occupied properties.
Yeah.
The feeling was, when you're giving a grant for somebody to repair an owner-occupied property, you're actually enhancing the value of their asset.
Okay, that's a perfect answer. So we deal with where there is serious disrepair, it's still going to be dealt with, but just through a slightly different mechanism.
That's correct.
Fantastic. Yes. Perfect. Thank you. Absolutely superb. If there's no more questions, then Angela, I'll pass back over to you for your recommendations then.
We accept the recommendations made at 2.1, that we approve the housing assistant policy, and that at 2.2, you grant delegated authority to myself and Head of Service, Gareth Davis, to make minor amendments to the policy from time to time, and also changes to the discretionary assistance, which is set out in Appendix A of the policy within approved budgets. This is very much to make sure that we can move, be agile in how we can implement things if we know we can get them to work.
Yeah,
fantastic. We can obviously update people, but that's the idea, asking for delegated authority.
Yeah, we trust you, Angela, don't worry. Right, all those in favour then, if you can indicate so I can see your hands, that'd be great. Excellent, that's unanimous. Thank you, Councillor Lax, and thank you, Gareth. I know there's a heck of a lot of hard work that goes into creating these policies and ironing out some of the more subtle nuances, which a lot of the time we don't touch on. So thank you for that legwork that goes into that. That's passed. Councillor Lax.
Leader. Can I just because before Gareth's gone, I think, but you beat me to it. I should have said, I very much appreciate all the hard work the officers have done on this, because it's been a huge piece of work. And there's still work to be done because you've given us delegated authority to keep working. But I'd like to recall publicly my sincere thanks and their time, you know, to take me through it all and for us to look at it and examine it all. So thank you very much, Gareth, and your team.
Excellent. Thank you all. Councillor Lax, we're still with you then for the review of committee meetings, and Christy Timms is joining you as well. And Christine Lewis, over to you. Angela, your audio is dropping out a touch there.
Is that any better?
No.
I can hear you all loud and clear, but you can't hear me.
There we go. We can hear you now, loud and clear. We've got you. We did have you.
Is that better? Is that
No.
better? 1, 2, 3. Any good?
Yeah, you're good now. Yeah, let's freeze exactly where you are and speak there.
Don't move, Andrew, you'll be fine.
I've been on a Zoom all afternoon. It's obviously worn out all my technology. I do apologise, everyone.
We've got you now.
Yeah, I'm not moving. An inch to the left or the right could change the reception at this rate, I think. Right. The review of the current system of overview and scrutiny was triggered because, with the exception of Planning Committee, there has not been a review since 2014. Although LDC has an ongoing commitment to scrutiny, it recognises there's clear evidence that it can achieve more. We need the changes being proposed to enable overview and scrutiny to work better. The Strategic Overview and Scrutiny Committee unanimously agreed the proposals set out in this report, and I'm very pleased it has cross-support, which is very important for a matter such as overview and scrutiny. Scrutiny does lack focus on the strategic issues. The existing committees are working in separate silos, which does not result in proper overview. The report is recommending one committee. I accept it is a big change, but this is the model that many authorities have adopted successfully. So it can concentrate on scrutinising the important things rather than noting or discussing role. This will give it a clear role and focus, which will add value. It will be able to prioritise work which is of genuine value and relevance to the wider work of LDC, with a work programme which should be robust and effective. Scrutiny is achieved by the early involvement of members at the pre-decision stage. I personally found this was the case taking the Housing Assistance Review Policy to overview and scrutiny very early on in January, with the clear intention to go back to them again in March, having taken on board their views, comments, suggestions, etc. Good policy. The new arrangements are designed to do this. The use of task groups will better involve all members, and they can bring us insights as the democratically elected members, and with their close connection to residents, they can add real value to the overview and scrutiny function. Task groups will be transparent and held in public, but with less formality. The statutory guidance on overview and scrutiny, issued by the Ministry of Housing, Communities and Local Government, issued in 2019, makes it clear effective overview and scrutiny provides a constructive, critical friend, not opposition. Its role is to act as a check and balance on us, the executive. Its members should adopt an independent mindset and take an approach. By carrying out its role in this way, the One Overview and Scrutiny Committee can be a fundamental part in improving policy making and driving improvement in how we deliver services and meet the needs of all our residents across the entire district. So I open it up to your comments and observations.
Thank you, Councillor Lax. And I think I'm going to go straight in there with one point, I think, just to help guide our discussion tonight, and then I'll sort of I'll bring in any additional comments, etc. at the end. Just at 2.6, well, Angela, you know my thoughts on this. I feel fairly strongly that the leader, whoever that is, whether it's me or my successor at some point, ought not to be the person who's selecting who marks his homework, as it were. And that ought to be the appointment of the full council rather than a nomination by the leader. So what I'm going to do, I'm just going to put in, and I've just put it in the chat so everyone can see the wording that I'll be proposing. But I'd propose that we alter that recommendation at 2.6 to read that full council will appoint the chair, and then broadly keep everything else similar. So full council will appoint the chair. The vice chair will be nominated by the leader of the opposition. Really important that we keep that availability for the opposition to nominate the vice chair. And all task group chairs are appointed by the chair of ONS. So it broadly keeps it the same, apart from it's not my nomination. We want full council to select who's going to hold the executive to account, rather than me picking someone to do my marking for me. I hope everyone is broadly okay with that, but I'll chuck that out there. And I can see Councillor Eadie is indicating to speak.
Thank you, Doug, and thank you, Angela. Having participated in the overview and scrutiny coordinating group, and indeed obviously sat as members have discussed their work programmes on different overview and scrutiny committees, I can absolutely understand, Angela, the direction that you're looking at in terms of one overview and scrutiny committee to avoid obviously duplication, and I think the phrase you've used is people working in silos, when in essence many of the things that our members would want to look at on behalf of their residents goes across more than just one area. So I can absolutely understand why you're putting forward the concept of one overview and scrutiny committee, and I'm absolutely happy to endorse that one. I think what I wanted to do, if it's possible, Angela, and I've got a number of points, but I'll ask them one at a time because that might be easier, is just to try and tease out as much for myself an understanding of how you think or how you see things are going to work. So just to give a little bit of context, our 4 existing committees met on 15 occasions, albeit virtually, in the current council year. Between us as cabinet members, including obviously Doug as leader, and I only counted the report he presented to all 4 committees once, we put forward 27 papers for members to consider. So that averages out, by my maths, at 1.8 papers per meeting for members to consider. As I understand it, the new one committee is proposed to meet 6 times in the council year. That's going to mean, if the same number of papers were to come forward, 4.5 papers that need to be considered at each meeting. I guess therefore my first question was, are we fixed at these 6 meetings, or will we be driven by the workload that comes forward? Because obviously trying to consider nearly 5 substantive papers at each meeting is probably going to be something that would give me concern in terms of, will members really be able to get in and perform their overview and scrutiny role with that amount of considerations in front of them at each meeting? So I just wondered whether or not the 6 meetings are fixed, or whether or not we will be adding to that if the workload of council dictates it.
Impressive mathematical analysis and adding up. I think one of the crucial differences, looking at your maths and referencing 15 meetings and 27 papers, is that the task group, when they were looking at what worked, looked at analysis of what papers had come before each of the committees, and quite a few were just for noting or briefing, and adding value or formulating policy or looking to get a better outcome for residents. So I think, first of all, going to this system, and I said in my introduction, we don't want to have the time and the focus just on noting and discussing. We want to really use it for us as an executive to be held by account, have early input into what we're proposing. Also, you'll see attached to this report in the appendix a sample, and I only stress that, matrix of how topics will be selected for the work programme of the ONS committee. And this is very much to ensure that what comes before the ONS committee is helping drive the strategic plan. It doesn't stop the ONS committee looking at other topics, but it's to make sure that we're spending time and analysing what really matters and will make a difference to people. That doesn't mean other things that have come before ONS papers previously will drop by the by. They'll just come as a different route to, say, full council, or put in as reports or updates to members. But it's the idea behind this, and very much stressed in the statutory guidance on ONS, is that you want to use it effectively to drive policy and the decisions we are taking as a cabinet. So what the outcome is the most effective it can be for your residents. So I think that's where we are. We've allowed for 6 meetings. It is a new system. It will take time to bed in. We will have to see. But I think if it goes as we plan, we might need a 7th. We might not. But it's going to be quite important for the chair, the vice chair, looking at what the cabinet say they want to bring forwards from the programme, testing how it will give real benefit to the council as a whole, the district, the residents we represent. So I think that will address the difference you've identified in your mathematical calculations.
Thank you, Angela. I hadn't counted the briefing papers that have come forward, but I understand exactly what you're saying in the sense of where there is the opportunity to provide information in a briefing paper rather than just for noting it. I guess in the answer that you give me, that
well, Ian, I don't know if you counted papers that came forward relating to issues that we have no control over at the district council. That's another thing we dealt with outside overview and scrutiny.
Yeah, obviously, I think particularly that comes into the community housing and health scope, as was. Forgive me a question. I'm sure I know what the answer is, but I'm asking it just for the reassurance. In your work with the task group and strategic overview and scrutiny, looking at this, you've used the phrase when you responded in the sense of saying that we don't want to just take things for noting. Was the task group and strategic overview and scrutiny conscious that, in essence, every report that they look at is for noting, because they're not a decision-making body, and as I understand it, you're not proposing to return to the committee system, are you?
Scrutiny. I think it's
Angela, your your audio is dropping out again. Sorry, you might just need to repeat that.
Am I back in?
Just about.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
I'm so sorry about this.
It seems to get clearer, Angela, when
on
you
my
start
system.
talking. It gets clearer when you start talking, Angela. So don't stop talking.
Okay. Overview and scrutiny's role isn't just to read papers and note them. That's holding the executive to account, and that's its role. It's to challenge us on what we're thinking of doing, and when we're bringing forward things that are really important and part of the strategic plan, and that is the real difference. And that's what I'm hoping we'll see as a better overview and scrutiny function, separate to reports, which could be to all members before council, or just updates. And I think that's the critical difference.
Okay. No, I
predicted by Christy, but that's
I absolutely,
that's the difference.
I am with you entirely in the sense of going early to overview and scrutiny to get their input into policy as it's being developed. I just was looking for that clarity that they are clear that we're not returning to the committee system, and therefore ultimately, I know we've had this whereby overview and scrutiny feel that they're making recommendations. They're helping inform the discussion and policy formulation between obviously the cabinet member and officers, but they're not there making recommendation and setting the policy. Okay. Task groups. Now, obviously at the moment, my understanding of task groups is that where a committee feels it would be of benefit to explore something further, they would form a task group, and then that task group would feed back into the committee itself. As I read 3.7 and 3.9 in your report, it prompts a question in me of saying, is that still how task groups will work? Because I might be mistakenly reading it, but it almost feels like these task groups, as it's perhaps portrayed, and again, apologies if I read it wrong, could almost become mini overview and scrutiny committees, in which case, therefore, for me, that feels a negative impact because we haven't brought everything together. We end up with, could end up with the task groups, if they are going to perform overview and scrutiny function on their own, ending up creating more committees rather than pulling it all together. So just what did you see as so I understand correctly, what is the scope of task groups and how will they work?
Both of the task groups will be very much for the chair, say vice chair of overview and scrutiny, to set their remit, to say, we want you to look at these specific points that have come up in discussions at overview and scrutiny committee. Please go away and look at them, discuss. So a task group might just be 3 meetings on a big piece of work. It could carry on, and it will be reporting to overview and scrutiny with its minutes, with its comments, but then it will be back to overview and scrutiny to deal with what we're proposing as the executive. It's not there, as you've rightly said, to formulate policy. It's there to be the critical friend and impartial. We won't have lots of mini committees because it'll be the chair of overview and scrutiny saying we need this task force to look at these specific points within a larger policy, probably come back to us and we take it from there.
Okay, yeah, I just had that concern that we would find task groups taking the work off a committee, and rather than having all voices, we'd end up with a limited voices. So thank you for answering that one. My final point, because I appreciate my cabinet colleagues will want to come in. In the recommendations, obviously you've outlined, apart from obviously the change to the principle for overview and scrutiny committees, some others that would be looked at. I just wanted to ask, will you be looking through all the committees that exist before this comes in front of full council, so that if we have got any whereby, again, they are non-decision making bodies, we've considered whether or not they are right and relevant? I'm just thinking of one that happens is taking place this week, whereby representations are being made to it. It's being lobbied, obviously to access funding, but obviously it's not a decision-making body, which would suggest it might be better elsewhere. So will you be looking at what other committees are in our current constitution to see if there's any of them that again should either be brought under this overview and scrutiny new committee or changed, so that if people from outside bodies do want to lobby the council, that they're lobbying obviously the executive rather than obviously members who don't have the ability to set policy?
This is a proposal to reduce the number of overview and scrutinies from 4 down to 1. All the other committees, bar the 2 referenced in the recommendations, 1.4 and 1. There, the two that is going to be more. Forgive me. There's a lot to go. Thank you very much, Councillor. But all the other committees will stay as they are, because if this shows other changes would be more beneficial, let's be incremental on this. And the overview and scrutiny is the function that's critical for getting the best we can out of what we want to do as a cabinet, and that we are rightly challenged, scrutinised, etc., in what we're bringing forward. Whereas the other committees, some of them are statutory anyway, and they have very much a different function to what an overview and scrutiny does.
Thank you for the answer. Being somewhat greedy when obviously you've said if we can take an incremental approach, if there is an opportunity to look at any of the other committees that sit that obviously are not decision-making bodies, I would be very, very grateful if that could be done as quickly as possible. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Eadie. Councillor Smith.
Thank you, Doug. Yeah, I've got similar sort of comments to Ian, but just a bit more detail on a couple. Yeah, I mean, I completely agree with the recommendations in the paper as to how we improve the arrangements and the execution of the scrutiny meetings. I think that's exactly the way we want to go. I think that's absolutely spot on. I think looking harder and faster and a bit more cleverly about what we put on the agenda, what we scrutinise. I think that's really important, and I fully go with all those recommendations. However, the reason we have ONS meetings is to ensure that we have a correct and efficient democratic process, and ultimately the end goal of that is to ensure that the policies that the council sets and the operations that the council performs give us the best outcomes for our district. That's why we do this. So you could kind of argue that we are doing less scrutiny, and I'm putting that in quotes. Can you kind of give me a bit of a summary, Andrew, on how moving from 4 committees to 1 will assist in enabling that process and the outcomes for our district?
When we talk about outcomes, if scrutiny is to be done properly, it should be looking in detail at the policies coming forward at an early stage. And with the current, and I say plethora of 4 committees plus a coordinating overview and scrutiny committee, things are just being popped in programmes a bit randomly or ad hoc to fill them with no clear route to where you want to get to at times. You know, that's just a product of the current system. It's not so critical, but that's what the current system causes to happen. But I think the whole point of this is to make it much more focused. And there's nothing to stop the chair or vice chair of overview and scrutiny, setting things they want to put on, provided it justifies being on the work programme. But I think it's not going to be less. I would use the word, this is going to be better, more focused and more effective, because there will be significant and ongoing training given to the chair, the vice chairs, all the members involved. And I think if they, if you have better scrutiny, that's all for the better. And I welcome the challenge. None of us get everything right all of the time. And we're democratically elected, and we should be democratically challenged on what we want to do and come out the other end with something we know that is the right thing for our residents.
Okay.
So I would say there's an element of quality over quantity because of the way the current system is constructed.
Yep. Okay. Cheers. The only other point I was going to make, and as we're obviously going to be, well, if the paper goes through, we're obviously moving from 4 committees down to 1 committee, and that means we're effectively going. I know there's vice chairman, but effectively in terms of chairman, we're going from four chairmen down to 1 chairman, which is as we said, it puts a lot more focus on there. Have we thought anything about this? Whoever chairs this committee, that's going to now be obviously a more onerous task, because whilst the 4 chairs before had to only understand and delve into less sort of cabinet portfolios, less what the council does. This particular scrutiny chair is going to have to span across the entire council, what the entire council does, and I think that's a really onerous task, actually. And if that's done correctly, that's a big job, in my opinion. Therefore, we need the right person with the right talent on the council. Have we looked at the members' allowances to maybe look at possibly having an equality with a cabinet member allowance, because I think it's such a big role.
I can see Christy nodding. It has to go through the independent review panel or whatever, but I think we're all agreed that what's been asked of the chairman, and it was clear from the members who gave us feedback in the consultation, that the chairman is going to have to work hard, but equally should have parity as chairman of overview and scrutiny with us as the cabinet. So I can see that makes sense, Councillor Smith. So when we go to the IRP, we'll put that to them.
Good, excellent. Makes a lot of sense to me. I think that really does make sense. Okay, that's it from me. Thank you, Angela.
Right. Thank you, Andy. I'm going to go over to Councillor Strachan.
Thanks, Leader, and thanks, Angela. To assist Councillor Smith, 2.7 is the commitment to take this to an independent remuneration panel, and it's perfectly proper to do so, because this is actually going to be a far greater task than our previous chairman of scrutiny have had, because it amalgamates all of it. Councillor Lax, like Councillor Smith, I'm a little concerned that there is an importance in ensuring that there is no net loss in the opportunities to scrutinise major projects that come forwards. And I need to make it absolutely clear, I'm not saying we need to scrutinise next year everything that we scrutinised this year, because I think you're perfectly right in saying papers for noting and things like that could probably drop out or be dealt with as briefing papers. And the duty, therefore, is on us, as well as on the incoming chairman of the scrutiny committee, to make sure that we bring quality papers at an appropriate early stage to be considered. And I say that more as a comment than a question. I'm a little bit in the dark about your proposal at recommendation 2.8, and I'm hoping that you'll be able to assist me with it. Because the move to a single committee is a major one. And the recommendation is that we don't review this until 2023 at the earliest. And so the question that's going to be couched in some other stuff is why then, and not after 1 year, as is the usual benchmark? Because if Councillor Eadie's quick maths is right, and we're going to ask members of this committee to be fully prepped and engaged with up to 5 substantive papers on every time they meet, does that not demand a review at the 12-month stage to further refine the policy and then make sure that it's fit for the incoming council in 2023?
I would disagree with the likelihood of there being 5 items on the overview and scrutiny's agenda, because of how the work programme is going to be formulated and what will go on the work programme. It's accepted as part of this that not every single thing you can think of is going to be scrutinised, because that's not effective scrutiny. So it's not going to be 5 items. I think the concern, and I am thinking out loud insofar as you raise a review, is that things have to bed in, and it's a big ask, and we all appreciate that here. That the committee's got to have its training, it's got to look at what it will put on its work programme with the possible new matrix, which we've shown as an example. There's various ways of doing that. The good news is that can happen to some extent over the summer, where we don't have meetings because it's the summer. So we'll start off properly September, October. And I think the view on the task group and experienced chairman, there was, the leader of the opposition, Councillor Norman, Chris Spruce, Brian Yates, statutory committee, was that it was a big ask to say, let's have a review the 1 year in, because it won't be 1 year in, it'll be from October to say April, because it's going to be so much more effective the older it gets, if you like. So whether we take away from this a commitment, because we're going to keep it under review. If there's problems or issues, that's the whole point, that the constitutional change will be at a high level so that we can make changes where we can see that we could do better. This is a better way of working, or members or the chairman or vice chair make suggestions to help it work. So I could use the phrase, I wouldn't rule it out, but I wouldn't rule it in, because I'm not sure how well we'll, how effective it'll be to do a full-on review.
Okay, so give it a year to, give it a year to iron out the kinks, then give it a year to work properly, and then look at it properly in 2 years' time. I follow the logic of that. Apart from that, I support your recommendation.
And we can always do a motion or briefing paper to full council showing how we're doing.
Right.
I think you set it out admirably, Councillor Strachan. Iron out kinks, and then it really kicks in.
Councillor Yates.
Thanks, Doug. I just wanted to add one thing, really, that a lot of my colleagues have said scrutiny is there to challenge. I think as well as to challenge, it also gives an opportunity for members to add, and that's what they've done a lot. So we've had the paper earlier tonight, and I'm sure Diane Evans from will have been involved at scrutiny, and Diane is the font of knowledge for DFGs. And I asked Councillor Lax this, as I said, if Diane Evans is happy with that, with something you brought forward, and if she's been able to add something to it, then I'm quite happy. And so for me, yes, it's the challenge, but it also gives members, cross-party members, the opportunity. And if this is going to help things, and especially with the task groups, then I'm all for it. And I'm very pleased as well to hear that it is something that is going to be, which I knew it would be, will be reviewed on an ongoing basis. So yes, this has my support. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Yates. Councillor Cox.
Thank you, Leader. Yeah, I too welcome the review and the size of the ONS going forward. I am conscious, though, that it would appear that obviously going from 4 to 1 is very radical. But certainly, as a previous chairman of ONS and also attending relevant courses, it is evident, and it was a number of years ago when we also looked at this, that a lot of other councils do operate with one overview and scrutiny, and as long as it is worked properly in the view of that it has the resources, that the task groups are clear with what is on the agenda and so forth, then absolutely it will become the critical friend rather than an obstacle. And it certainly should be that way. And certainly, as already alluded to, the fact that it is there as a mechanism for that pre-decision that takes on board members to making a decision rather than scrutinising the decision afterwards or so forth. So I'm just wanting to be reassured that the resources that would be available in the process of creating task groups in accordance to the work programme and so forth, it is going to be available to us, or certainly to the members, to be sure that it actually is a workable system. And I do welcome this, something I personally looked at previously, even though I slightly came to a different conclusion. But certainly a reduction in the number of scrutiny committees is very much welcomed. And I think it will focus scrutiny far better than having it fragmented, as already used the word silo. And yeah, I support the recommendations. Thank you, Chairman.
Great, thank you, Councillor Cox. Angela, did you want to come back on any of those points?
You know, when we had the consultation with members, it was, everybody said the same. Training for the chairman, the vice chairman, the members on ONS, and the entire membership in overview and scrutiny. But what's critical is the continuing support and resource. And I can see Christy nodding there, and we're very much aware that to get it to work, that's what's required. We've assessed it as having, I think it's a neutral effect, isn't it, Christy, on the budgets, that, you know, by cutting down to one committee, we've still got the resources to really pile in to get this working how it should do. And as Councillor Cox alluded to the fact that many councils work with the one committee for the reasons that we've gone through today, and his comments alone, I think, demonstrate why we want to go this route.
Great, thank you. Any more for any more then? No, I think just from me then, Councillor Lax, I think both you, the officers, and the task group members have done a fantastic job in pulling all of this together. Again, incredible amount of legwork that's gone on behind the scenes. For me personally, I think having one overview and scrutiny committee is going to help us form better policy, get them involved earlier on in the process, and make sure that we've formed better policy, as well as scrutinising the implementation of that policy as well, obviously along with audit. So that will be, I think, a real strong way of holding us, the executive, to account. I think the point somebody made earlier on about parity of esteem. So when we moved away, and it was before my time, but we moved away from the committee system to the executive and overview and scrutiny method of operation. The whole point was that the overview and scrutiny committee would have parity of esteem with the executive, and therefore they'd be treated in a similar manner and given the same access to information, to ensure there's a really strong check and balance. And certainly in my view, folding the 4 committees into one creates that parity of esteem with one really strong committee, which will hold us to account. Hopefully the independent remuneration panel will also bear that in mind when they come to looking at what they're going to be, the allowance that comes along with that, which will be reflective of the incredible amount of not only hard work and legwork, but incredible breadth of knowledge that whoever this ONS chair is will need to have in order to know the questions to ask and where to look, and how to coordinate what will be quite a powerful committee. So I think that really does help us get much further towards parity of esteem, which will be helpful, I think, for local democracy. I think and again, as someone else pointed out earlier on, we're folding 12 allowances into 2 here. We've currently got 4 chairmen and 8 vice chairs. We're taking that down to 1 chair and 1 vice chair, so I think that can only be a good thing. Just we haven't talked much tonight about the parish forum and the district board, and I just wanted to say there, I think it's really important that we retain clarity of purpose for everything we do as a council. And I think both the parish forum and district board, their objectives can be met in much more efficient ways than maybe we've currently or recently been doing. So I fully welcome how we're approaching the parish forum and district board. It's not to say we're not doing the same work, we're just doing it in a slightly different way, which I think will be a bit more agile and a bit more cohesive well across the council. So for me, fully supportive of all the recommendations, bar the one 2.6, which, as I said earlier on, I don't want to pick who marks my homework. I want full council to do that. So I've got the amended recommendation there in the chat, which I think Christy or Christine has captured, hopefully. So Angela, back over to you.
Thank you, Lee. I've got my chat up. So I'd like to move that we accept all the recommendations from 2.1 to 2.9, say that 2.6 is amended to read that full council will appoint the chair, the vice chair will be nominated by the leader of the opposition, and all task group chairs are appointed by the chair of overview and scrutiny.
Thank you very much. All those in favour then, if you can indicate so I can see it, that'd be great. We've got all the hands up. That's unanimous. Councillor Lax, thank you for that piece of work, and thank you for bringing that paper to us tonight. And thank you, Christy and Christine, and everybody else who's put in, as I say, an incredible amount of legwork into what's a fairly complex paper. Thank you. Next up then, we have got Councillor Cox, and you're bringing a paper to us on Garrick funding. Councillor Cox. Councillor Yates, yeah, you can leave us, please. Thank you very much. And Richard, you're joined by Ben Percival as well, Head of Operational Services. Welcome, Ben.
Thank you, Leda. And yes, I'm ably supported by Ben Percival. I'm pleased to be able to present this report to Cabinet today. It is an accumulation of a significant amount of work by both the Council and the Trust to agree a longer term settlement of the relationship between our two organisations. This report and recommendations were supported by the Leisure Parks and Waste Management Overview and Scrutiny Committee on the 1st of April. As the report outlines, the Trust has a lease until 2029, but we are now at the end of our current funding agreement with the Trust. Under the concessionary service agreement, which expired at the end of March, the Council's payments were considered VAT-able supply, which allowed the Trust to recover the VAT and thus benefit financially. Extensive work has been undertaken with legal and tax advisors. The consensus is that the extending such a VAT favourable arrangement much further would not be compatible with the procurement legislation. The recommendation is therefore to revert to a grant agreement as was in place previously. The other options are presented in the report, but as I hope Cabinet colleagues will agree, all are significantly worse than the grant agreement proposed in recommendation 2.1. Setting future funding at an appropriate level has required balancing of a number of factors and series of frank but constructive and positive discussions with the Garrick Trust. The last 12 months clearly been extremely difficult for the theatre industry, with most theatres effectively not trading since March 2020. Changing the VAT status of future payments will reduce the funding available to the Trust. Fundamentally, even in the best of circumstances, the advice is that the theatres of the Garrick size are likely to require some element of financial support. However, I am aware that our culture and heritage spend, which is principally the Garrick funding, is subsequently higher than that of our statistical neighbours. I'm also conscious that in the recent budget consultation, our residents did not prioritise funding the Garrick highly. As outlined in the report, a further reduction of the funding to the Trust is proposed. This continues to provide support, especially as we emerge from COVID, but would ultimately see the Council's level of funding drop to £75,000 per year. Tapering the funding in this way has been discussed with the Trust and is considered manageable. It secures ongoing theatre provision whilst delivering a significant saving to the Council, especially considering that the initial grant to the Trust when it first spun out was nearly £700,000. As such, I am satisfied that the funding outlined in paragraph 3.13 and proposed in recommendation 2.2 strikes the appropriate balance. Entering into the new agreement with the Trust gives us opportunity to clarify the outcomes that we are seeking from our investment in theatre provision. accepting that the council's investment has never been lower. It remains substantial, certainly for the next few years. And we need to be clear what we get in return, rather than the long list of somewhat nebulous requirements in the previous partnership agreement. I'm keen to see a shorter list of more tangible and measurable outputs as outlined in paragraph 3.24 and proposed in recommendation 2.3. I'd like to express my thanks to the work that Ben Percival has put into this paper. And also I would add that we've also had our leader, Councillor Doug Pullen, also been involved. And over to you, leader. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Councillor Cox. You're joined by Ben, as I said earlier on, so I'm sure as a duo you will take any questions. Councillor Little, over to you first. Thank you.
Thank you, leader. No questions really, just a statement to say I welcome this report tonight. I'm glad to see, obviously, we've got an agreement in place with the Garrick for the next few years. I know when I was portfolio, when I was portfolio holder previously, you know, it's something that they need something in place and that they can work with, and that's, you know, for a longer period of time, so that they know they've got that funding. So I welcome this report tonight, and I hope that it's a step forward in bringing that strategic partnership tighter with the Garrick Theatre Trust. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Councillor Little. And apologies if I get paper in the wrong order here, but I'm just working through my list. Ian Eadie.
Thank you, Doug, and thank you, Richard, for the report. I suspect you've got the auspicious task this evening that you've got 3 cabinet colleagues who've held the portfolio before you, and would all obviously like to think that you know, we understand the situation with the Garrick. Thank you for making the point in your presentation that obviously residents' views in the budget consultation didn't support obviously continuing to fund the Garrick at the same level, and therefore obviously I welcome the report this evening, because obviously it seeks to reflect that in bringing down the funding. With my own obviously portfolio in mind, I do, however, ask everybody to recognise the value that the Garrick Theatre represents, not only to the district and its visitor economy, but also to our residents as well. I do know that they capture the data of where people who come to see shows come from, and as much as it's people who come outside the district, it is people inside the district who use the theatre as well. So again, I would like to see us do all that we can to ensure that the theatre can carry on and can deliver what people would like to see in a local area. It would be a real shame to see that theatre lost, as others have been, because of obviously council cuts to funding. And I am conscious as well, obviously, that what the theatres had to do when we have cut the funding, obviously local amateur dramatic groups no longer can access some of the weeks that they would have liked to have done in the past, because quite understandably the Garrick had to prioritise booking acts that were going to pay them a higher rate. So obviously we've got to strike that balance between what the theatre does as a local resource, and for that reason I obviously would like to keep supporting them in an appropriate fashion. That probably therefore leads me to my query. And I think obviously the report does do it, but I'm just looking for the clarification. Again, on the point that our previous funding cuts have caused a negative impact because of the decisions that the Garrick theatres had to make. Can you assure me that the reductions that are set out in the report are agreed with the theatre, that they can make them work, and that they're not anticipating having to have any more negative impacts on those who use the theatre as a consequence?
Yeah, certainly. To answer that, I obviously with the extensive negotiations and discussions, that has obviously been really a paramount consideration in the funding process, because obviously without, and if we were to go to, certainly in the early days of post-COVID, of cutting it to a level that they are not able to survive puts us in a very difficult situation with regards, as you say, that nighttime economy, etc., adding the value to the district. So it certainly did take that into consideration for sure, and they are aware of where we have finished in terms of what we're offering here, that they were aware things might wanted more, but they are satisfied that we are getting to that level.
Just to push you a little bit there, Richard. So they're happy that the reduction, as it's outlined in the report, is sustainable for them.
Sustainable, but I wouldn't necessarily use the word happy. They would like to see more, and certainly the VAT was also had to be factored in the early days, because obviously that was also considered quite a big loss to them, not being able to recover the VAT.
Thank you, Richard.
Great, thank you, Ian. We'll go to Councillor Lax next.
Thank you. Thank you, Richard. I'm picking up on 3.24 because I'm conscious we've got the point's been made 3 previous portfolio holders with much more detailed knowledge. But 3.24 is saying, and I welcome this, far more focused and a reduced number of KPIs, because I think prior to this it was quite nebulous. And as we're still giving money, then we're entitled to know how it's doing. And it says that there's going to be suggested KPIs that can be baselined and reported on, could include. So what is planned following this, if it's recommended, to ensure there's a review process in place and it's agreed what the KPIs will be on and how they will report back to us?
Well, to answer, yeah, that would be obviously we will go back to the theatre. I don't know whether Ben can enhance that, but the idea of the KPIs is clear. Is that we're wanting to have that tangible review to ensure that the grant this time round going forward. We understand, if you want to use an expression, we know what we're getting for our money on behalf of the council taxpayers. So it becomes more tangible rather than not knowing really how they're spending our grant. I don't know whether Ben can expand on that if necessary.
Thanks, Councillor Cox. What we will be looking at with the KPIs is probably reporting on a quarterly basis and also having an annual review as to how things are going. But as a number of members have identified tonight, the idea here is for us to go forward in partnership with the Garrick Trust. It's important that we create a longer term agreement here to give them a degree of financial planning stability, but it's important that we do keep monitoring and working in partnership so that we understand how trading picks up post lockdown and how this reduction in funding does impact on their services, because this is an important partnership for the council, and the Garrick success is indeed Lichfield's success.
I'd just like to see, the reporting dates and what they report on put in place as quickly as possible, because things will change as we come out of COVID. But it is, taxpayers' money. It's still quite a considerable amount of money on top of all the COVID recovery funding which they've had, and we're entitled to know. And I think it's so important to see how it is working, as you quite rightly say. So thank you, and I would really want to see that in place as quickly as possible.
Noted. Thank you, Councillor Lax.
Great, thank you, Councillor Smith.
Sorry, Doug, I'm here. I lost my unmute button, but I'm back. Yeah, but pretty much agree with what my colleagues have said on this one as well already. And just to be quite clear, I fully support the Garrick as something that's extremely important to our district. The district has benefited massively, in my opinion, over the years from the Garrick. It fills a real void in the entertainment leisure industry in our district. It's there. It's done a great job, and I would absolutely never want to see it stop or the doors have to close. However, having said that, let's look back at what this council has done in terms of assisting them, or rather weaning them off a grant. When the Garrick first took over, we had a larger grant of probably £900,000 or so a year, and we've gradually weaned them down off that. Quite correctly, that was the whole point of setting up a theatre. They needed assistance to get going. That's how these things work. The council assisted in that because other organisations won't be interested in that. We did that. We've got them running, and now I'm really pleased to see that we're down to a position whereby we can now taper that again. And I think COVID and other factors have meant we sort of had to level off on that tapering. But now we're in a good position where we can continue with that tapering, and I fully support the tapering down from the 250,000 grants as we are today down to 75 in 5 years' time, I think it is. The only sort of one of the small questions I have is we then in the agreement appear to continue for another 3 years with a 75k grant, and I know there's been some talk that we have to be seen as a local authority to give something towards a grant towards the theatre so they can get funding from elsewhere. But I just wonder what sort of evidence base have we put into that, and why have we chosen that particular number? And quite frankly, does it have to be that much? Where did we get that from? For those, I like the tapering down to that point, but we seem to continue that for my liking too far in this particular agreement. What's our logic there?
The logic behind the decision, obviously, it has been negotiated to that level, and it was considered that the Garrick were looking for a higher figure, but we felt that was the figure that we would go to. In terms of obviously the tapering down, the initial 2 years, obviously, as you see, is still significantly high, but that really is in response to post-COVID and the loss of VAT claim. It at least gives them a footing to get their management and finances level, that we can meet them the 75k, that enables them to still be able to get additional funding, knowing that there is funding coming in to be supported. I would probably say that in those years, I think it does give us scope. If we are aware that actually we're not seeing our money being spent, then we can say, it's in a situation of saying, well, hang on, we have to review it. And I think the way that we're going back to the grant given will give us that flexibility to be able to think how we go, whether we need to adjust it. And again, in what you're looking for, Councillor Smith, is a downward projection still. Well, hopefully that might be helpful to you.
Yeah, that is helpful. Thank you, Richard. I appreciate that. That's me done. Thanks, Leader.
Great. Thanks, Andy. Councillor Reilly, back to you.
Thank you. Richard, I'm just conscious from some of the comments. Am I right in thinking that what we've set out in the report is our ideas of what we might ask the Garrick Theatre for? Or have we actually discussed that with them and agreed it as a partnership that they can provide it?
The figures in front of you have been discussed.
No, not the figures, sorry, Richard. Things like the KPIs that are suggested. Because obviously, I guess I'm very conscious that the Garrick Trust is a separate legal entity. We can't, as I understand it, make legal demands and say, you give us your information. It's going to have to be a spirit of partnership and cooperation. So my question was, have we agreed with them what the KPIs are, or is that something still to be done?
Ben, I believe that is something that we've still got to go back for a full agreement with them.
Thanks, Councillor Cox. We've shared these KPIs with the Garrick, and they're based on relatively straightforward operational information that they should be providing and reporting for themselves as a matter of course. But absolutely, as the report requests delegated authority to Councillor Cox for us to formalise this arrangement with the Garrick Theatre with Cabinet's approval.
Thank you, Richard. Thank you, Ben. Yeah, I mean, I think it's the key thing, isn't it? If we can have good ongoing relationship with the theatre, I'm sure there will be a willing partner to us. I know in the past we've ended up in a situation whereby we've somewhat been at loggerheads and often they haven't shared what we might have liked to share. So I think if we can keep a good partnership working with them, then that's for the betterment of not only obviously those who use the theatre, but also the district as a whole in terms of its economy.
Yeah, to confirm that point, Ian, I've made it abundantly clear that it is our intention that we wish to support the Lichfield Garrick and not walk away from it, and it is very much working together to ensure that it is considered in terms of partnership that takes it forward, that we're not putting it on a, if you use the expression, a sticky wicket that actually makes things difficult for us going forward. Very much would like to see us be in harmony and knowing that we're there for the right reasons in theatre business. Hopefully that helps you.
Thank you, Richard.
Great, thank you, Councillor Eadie. I can't see anybody else indicating to speak, so not really any questions from me, Richard, but just comments to the effect of it. I think picking up on 2 comments that have been made tonight, one off Councillor Eadie and one off Ben. Good partnership working and ensuring we've got a continuation of good partnership working, and the fact that the Lichfield Garrick success is our success. I've had some really positive conversations with Richard Barnes, the chair of the trustees of the Garrick. And again, as Councillor Cox said, all of our conversations have been predicated on the fact that we want the Lichfield Garrick to be a success. And I think we've had some really constructive, sort of mature conversations with how we step into this next phase of our relationship with the Garrick. It feels positive all around. It feels really engaging. And the Garrick, got our assurance that we step with them, every step of the way, and we've got a really positive relationship there. So I think this has been something that Councillor Cox and Ben have done with the Garrick, not to the Garrick, and I think that's a really important point to make there. So if there's no more questions, then Councillor Cox, over to you for your recommendations.
Thank you. Recommendations are 2. The Cabinet at 2.1 approve the relationship with the Lichfield Garrick Theatre Limited and revert to a strategic partnership agreement. 2.2 approve funding for the strategic partnership agreement to the values outlined in paragraph 3.13. 2.3 approve the strategic partnership agreement detail a smaller number of more measurable outcomes to better assess the contribution to LD's strategic objectives. And at 2.4, give delegated authority to the Cabinet member for Leisure, Parks and Waste in conjunction with the Head of Operations Services to enter into a strategic partnership agreement with the Garrick Theatre Limited on the basis of the principles outlined in this report. Those are my recommendations.
Great, thank you, Councillor Cox. All those in favour, if you can indicate so I can see you. We're all there. That's unanimous. Thank you very much, Councillor Cox. Thank you, Ben, for all your hard work on that paper and the legwork that you've done behind the scenes, as ever. That concludes the business for tonight, everybody. So thank you for your attendance. Thank you, officers, for all your work, and we will see you in due course. Thank you all. Good night.
Good night.
Good night.